My mother-in-law gave me divorce papers as a gift. She never expected my revenge at the lavish birthday party. When I got married, I thought I was building a family. But over time I realized I had entered a silent game, where every gesture was loaded with judgment and contempt, especially from my mother-in-law. Working as a waitress, I was always told my place was to serve, not to dream. Still, I kept smiling, even when each smile cost me pieces of my dignity. On my birthday, I was invited to a surprise dinner. What I received that night wasn't a gift, it was a blow. But what no one there knew was that I was already ready. That humiliation wasn't the end. It was the spark. And the woman who walked out of that room would never again accept being who she once was. Today, my story inspires strength, courage, and new beginnings, even for those who thought they were trapped forever. I'm so happy to have you here. Follow until the end and comment what city you're from. I want to know how far this story of overcoming has reached. It was supposed to be just a quick stop in the living room, grab my keys and leave. But something made me stop. Margaret had her back to me, bent over the table, with a pink envelope in her hands. She was flipping through papers in a hurry, but when she noticed my presence, she abruptly hid everything, as if she were committing a crime. She looked at me over her shoulder with a rehearsed smile, one of those that don't reach the eyes. I froze for a second, swallowing hard. I tried to smile back, pretending not to have noticed anything. But her gesture planted an uncomfortable seed inside me. Margaret never left anything out of place, and a pink envelope so flashy didn't match her meticulous personality. Why was she nervous? Why hide it? I left, but I took that image with me, as vivid as a photograph I didn't want to remember. On the way to work, my thoughts kept returning to the envelope. It was my birthday that week. Could it be related to that? But then why hide it? I tried to shake off the paranoia, to convince myself that maybe it was just something trivial. And yet, something in my stomach churned, as if my body knew before me that it wasn't for nothing. Margaret only moved for calculated reasons. I knew that look well, the same one she used when preparing a trap covered in flowers. That woman never did anything without a motive. And I once again was off script. Why hide a birthday envelope? I remembered Sunday lunches, all the compliments that tasted of poison. You have nimble hands, Jennifer. You should be a manicurist. Or the classic. Romano's is cute, it must be great until something real comes along. Always said with a polite smile, while stirring her tea with surgical precision. I smiled back. Not because I agreed, but because, in that house, disagreeing was seen as rudeness. Politeness was the shield of offenses. Every sentence seemed calculated to diminish me without appearing cruel. And the worst part, David never noticed. Or pretended not to notice, which hurt even more. I would come home feeling like something had been ripped from me, but how to prove it? How to show that words spoken with sweetness could leave invisible scars? Margaret was a master at it. She made it seem like I was too sensitive, that everything was all in my head. Sometimes I found myself questioning, was I really overreacting? Maybe it was just common bickering between mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law. Maybe she just wanted to encourage me to grow. But if that was the case, why did it hurt so much? Why did I always feel smaller after seeing her? There was a pattern there, and I was tired of pretending I didn't notice. Margaret didn't need to yell to hurt. She preferred the elegance of veiled cruelty. And I, more and more, was beginning to recognize her weapons. Is she overreacting? On Wednesday, Emma appeared at the restaurant with a mischievous smile. She twirled her car keys on her finger as if bored, but her eyes said otherwise. Saturday's dinner is going to be unforgettable, she let slip, as if revealing a secret unintentionally. I stopped wiping the table for a moment and looked at her, trying to decipher her tone. It was as if something was about to happen and she wanted me to know or fear. I swallowed my insecurity and continued cleaning, but my mind was on alert. Emma never included me in anything, so why that offhand remark? Unforgettable didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like a premonition. Promise. I started putting the pieces together. The pink envelope, Margaret's guilty look, now this provocation from my sister-in-law. Something was being plotted, and I seemed to be the target. I tried to sound out Tony, but he didn't know anything. Or if he did, he chose not to tell me. Emma said goodbye with a kiss in the air, as if she had left a ticking time bomb on the table. I spent the rest of the day restless, paying attention to everything. Even the clinking of cutlery seemed louder than usual. I was surrounded by eyes that knew more than I did. My intuition, always silent, now screamed inside me. It was no longer paranoia. It was an alert. What is being planned? There was one night during a family dinner when Margaret decided to play with my job. Jennifer understands service, right? What's the difference between a waiter and a waitress anyway? She asked, smiling at the guests. Everyone laughed. I smiled too instinctively, but inside something sank. I pretended not to care. I answered with humor. But my face burned, not with shyness but with shame. It was always like that. A comment here, a jab there. All disguised as lightness. I hated feeling like I had to justify my profession, as if it were less worthy than others. I started to doubt my own worth. Was I really less? Those glances of pity or superiority haunted me for days. Even my posture changed. I became smaller. On the way back home, I replayed the scenes like someone reviewing a fall. Margaret knew where to hit. It wasn't about the restaurant. It was about constantly reminding me of the place she thought I belonged. And that place was not by her son's side. It was serving. Silent. Invisible. It was as if my existence was an affront to the idea of silent nobility she cultivated. How far does her contempt go? At that Saturday dinner, the table was set with refinement. Linen tablecloth, silver cutlery, sparkling glasses. I sat next to David trying to fit in. Margaret, as always, led with calculated elegance. At one point, she picked up my fork with a restrained laugh and said, "Jennifer, dear, this is the one for the fish. But understandable, you didn't grow up with this." The phrase echoed like a slap. Everyone laughed. Some, out of embarrassment. Others, out of complicity. I froze. The fork felt like a weapon in my hands. David said nothing. He just continued eating as if nothing had happened. I felt the table pull away, as if I were silently plummeting. Heat rushed to my face and I smiled, because that's what was expected of me. To smile. I wanted to disappear, or get up and scream. But I did what I always did. I stayed silent. I thought of Romano's, where I deftly commanded trays, where I felt useful. Here everything was different. I was an out-of-place accessory. An etiquette blunder. Even breathing wrong seemed like a crime in that house. I looked at David, expecting any sign of support. Will David defend her? But he said nothing. He merely lowered his eyes as if he hadn't heard. I stared at him for a few seconds, trying to find something. An expression, a gesture, anything. Nothing. His omission hurt more than the public humiliation. It was as if I were alone, exposed, and he had chosen to protect himself instead of protecting me. On the way home, the silence between us was thick. He tried to talk about the wine, the main course, the decor. I just agreed, my voice choked. I couldn't pretend nothing had happened. That had broken something inside me. It wasn't about the fork. It was about everything he let slide. Everything he allowed his mother to do to me day after day. That night, I lay looking at the ceiling. I wondered at what point I had lost myself. And why I still persisted. Was it love? Or fear of giving up? For the first time, I began to think about the possibility of leaving. Not as an outburst, but as a silent liberation. I needed something more. Something that wouldn't make me apologize for existing. Jennifer begins to consider leaving. I sent resumes everywhere. Hotels, coffee shops, clinic receptions, any place that would accept my customer service experience. With each new attempt, a hope ignited, and died out just as quickly. There were 47 rejections. Some in silence, others politely cruel. Your profile doesn't fit. We're looking for someone with a higher education. As if years of excellent service counted for nothing. I started to feel small. Useless. As if everything I knew how to do was irrelevant to the world outside Romano's. My self-esteem drained away with each rejection. Even smiling at work seemed harder. And yet I persisted, like someone trying to open a door with the wrong keys, hoping one of them would work. With each phone notification, my heart raced. But it was always promotions or newsletters. Nothing that would get me out of my rut. Sometimes I wondered if the problem was with me. Maybe Margaret was right. Maybe I really was just a waitress who dreamed too big. But then something inside me refused to accept that as the end. Because even wounded, I still had a hunger for the future. Is it worth continuing to try? Maria realized before I said anything. In the middle of a busy morning, she pulled me aside in the kitchen and looked me in the eyes with tenderness. Your shoulders are lower than usual, she said. That was all it took for me to break down. I told her about the resumes, the no's, the feeling of failure. She listened to everything with the patience of someone who had lived a lot. She said that sometimes life closes all doors to force us out a window, and that perhaps I hadn't looked in the right direction yet. She spoke of my talent with people, the calm I brought even on the most chaotic days at the restaurant. You are worth more than this difficult moment, she said and smiled. It was simple, but it touched me deeply. It wasn't a promise that everything would work out. It was just someone reminding me that I was still seen. And that day that was enough. I went back to the dining room lighter. Still hurt, of course, but there was a spark lit again. A tiny bit of faith, one of those almost imperceptible ones that still warms you. Maybe the world still had a place for me. Will a door open? At the end of my shift, Mr. Romano called me to the bar. He calmly wiped glasses as he always did when he wanted to talk. You have something that can't be taught, Jennifer, he began. You have presence. I was speechless. He continued, saying that in years in the restaurant business, few people had the dedication I showed, even on the worst days. If I could clone you, I'd have 4 more Romanos, he joked. That phrase made me smile. It was rare to hear sincere compliments. They came without ulterior motives, without hidden layers. I stood there listening to this man who knew me behind the scenes acknowledge my effort. And for an instant I felt whole. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't mediocre. There was someone who saw more in me than my snobbish mother-in-law saw. Mr. Romano gave me a light pat on the shoulder and returned to the counter as if nothing much had happened. But for me that was everything. I left the restaurant with teary eyes, but for the first time in days it was gratitude. Little did I know that something more was about to happen. An unexpected phone call is about to happen. It was a typical afternoon when the phone rang. I looked at the unknown number and almost didn't answer. But something made me swipe my finger across the screen. The voice on the other end was firm and gentle. Jennifer Adams? This is Jessica Martinez from the Grand Plaza Hotel. My heart pounded. She said she had read my resume, that someone from Romano's had mentioned me. She praised my career. And she made the invitation. She wanted to interview me for a position in hospitality, in another state. Her voice conveyed seriousness but also warmth. It was as if someone finally saw the real value behind the uniform. I almost asked if it was a prank call. Life had trained me to doubt good things. But no, it was real. We scheduled the interview for the next morning by video. I hung up still in shock, my hand trembling. I sat on the couch and took a deep breath, like someone holding a fragile hope between their fingers. After so many no's, that yes seemed like a mirage. But there was too much sparkle in that mirage to ignore. Could it be true? The next day I meticulously styled my hair, put on the sharpest white shirt I owned, and positioned my phone in the best light. The interview started promptly. Jessica asked me direct questions, listening carefully to each answer. She seemed genuinely interested, not just polite. For the first time, I didn't have to shrink myself to appear adequate. I spoke with pride about my work at Romano's, the challenges with difficult clients, the organization of crowded events. She took notes diligently, sometimes smiling. The conversation lasted 30 minutes, but it felt like I was presenting myself to the world after being hidden for a long time. When I hung up, I felt a new lightness. It was as if, even without knowing the result, I had regained a piece of myself. It wasn't just about the job, it was about being seen, heard, respected. I spent the rest of the day with my chest full of a shy but growing confidence. As if I were slowly relearning who I was. What if she chose me? Will there be an offer? 2 days later, the email arrived. I opened it with sweaty hands. Jessica was straightforward. We are pleased to offer you the position. Salary, US $45,000 annually, with company housing included and a start date in 2 weeks. I read those words about 5 times. It was like a light turning on in the darkness. I cried. Alone in the kitchen, I cried silently for everything I had waited for. And now finally it was happening. The offer seemed like a golden ticket to a new life. And even if fear tried to creep in, There was a greater strength within me, that of someone who had already endured too much. I printed the contract, folded it carefully, stored it in an old jewelry box, like someone protecting a treasure. It was my secret, my plan. I didn't tell anyone. Not Maria, not Mr. Romano, not David. That decision had to be mine until the end. I decided to wait for the anniversary dinner. The same party Emma had promised would be unforgettable. They thought they would bring me down, but I already had my card, and it was kept in the safest place in the house. Jennifer decides to wait for the anniversary dinner to tell. I printed the proposal with trembling hands. Every line of that contract felt like a breath of freedom. I carefully trimmed the edges, folded it precisely, and went to the bedroom. I opened my old jewelry box, a gift from my grandmother, and hid the paper inside, among forgotten necklaces and old promises. I closed it slowly, as if that object now held my future. It was my most precious secret. I touched the lid gently. There was the beginning of a new life. But the sense of urgency grew. I wanted to shout to the world that I had won, but I held back. It wasn't time yet. They needed to see. They needed to understand how much they had underestimated me. And for that, the moment had to be exact. The box remained hidden at the bottom of the drawer, as if it held a map to my liberation. I spent the following days sleeping lightly, but waking with a pounding heart. With each beat, a question arose. When to reveal it? At what precise second do I rip off the masks? I planned everything in silence, because for the first time I was the author of the turnaround. When to reveal it? On Saturday, I calmly put on my uniform. I put perfume behind my ears and tied my hair up as I always did, but with more care. It was my birthday and, according to Emma, an unforgettable night. I smiled at the mirror, not with vanity but with firmness. They thought they knew me. But today's Jennifer was no longer the same. I put the jewelry box in my purse, among napkins and pens. I felt its weight like a talisman. As I walked through Romano's dining room, each step felt firmer. I greeted customers, organized tables, pretended normalcy. But inside, my heart danced between fear and courage. I knew something was about to explode. Emma arrived first with that mocking air. Then Margaret, impeccable as always. David followed behind with his eyes downcast. I looked at everyone, one by one, like someone studying a chessboard. They didn't know it, but I was about to turn the tables. What if something went wrong? What if something goes wrong? As I distributed cutlery, I felt someone watching me. It was Tony, the youngest waiter. He looked at me with silent admiration. "You're different today," he said in a complicit whisper. I smiled. He didn't know what it was, but he felt it. There was light in my eyes, and it wasn't because of my birthday. It was because I was ready. For the first time ready. Tony was attentive. He knew how to read silences, gestures, glances. Working alongside him always brought me lightness. But that day he did more. He gave me the certainty that my energy was changing. I no longer cowered. I took up space. And even without understanding the reason, he respected me for it. "What's going to happen today?" he asked with a half smile. "Something good," I replied. That was all I could say. He didn't insist. He just nodded and went back to work. But he stayed close, as if he sensed that I needed witnesses, not to the fall but to the rise. The night had begun. The surprise dinner begins. Margaret arrived in her navy blue dress, elegant and strategic. Beside her, Emma filmed discreetly with her cell phone, pretending to be checking messages. I saw the lens move towards me and turned my face away. The room was full, but something about that group created a vacuum around them. Their laughter was louder, their gestures more choreographed. It was a play and I was the show. I greeted everyone politely. David kissed my forehead coldly. Margaret complimented my resistance to oven heat, as if I were part of the restaurant furniture. Emma winked at me, amused. Nothing made sense in terms of affection, but everything made sense in terms of a plan. They were waiting for the perfect moment. I sat at the reserved table. The staff watched me from a distance, some curious, some involuntary accomplices. Mr. Romano passed quickly, touched my shoulder but kept going. He knew something was in the air. So did I. And yet, I maintained my composure. It was the only weapon they didn't expect. I started to suspect. But I wasn't fazed. Jennifer suspects. Dinner followed a well-rehearsed script. Light appetizer, well-served main courses, fake smiles. When dessert arrived, Margaret wiped her lips with her napkin and pulled a pink envelope from her pocket. The same one. My eyes froze. She placed it on the table with theatrical delicacy. Happy birthday, dear. Everyone fell silent. Emma adjusted her phone. David looked at his plate. I took the envelope without saying anything. My name was there, in impeccable handwriting. My fingers trembled, but my face did not. I opened it carefully. There they were, the divorce papers. I stared at them for seconds that felt like hours. Margaret smiled. Emma filmed. They waited for my reaction. They waited for me to collapse. But I didn't give it to them. I looked around. People had stopped chewing. The sound of cutlery had vanished. An invisible tension filled the air. All they wanted was my collapse in front of the cameras. A scene to replay in the family group, perhaps. But I wouldn't give them that gift. Not today. Was I going to cry? Is she going to cry? Instead, I calmly stood up. My hand still held the envelope, but my eyes were already elsewhere. I went to the counter where my purse rested. I grabbed the jewelry box. I returned to the table with firm steps. I placed the box next to the papers. I opened it. I took out the letter from the Grand Plaza. I have something to deliver as well, I said. I looked directly at Margaret, then at Emma, then at David. I accept the divorce. I signed the paper with a borrowed pen. By the way, this is my new contract. Job, housing, decent salary. I showed it to everyone. The room fell silent. No one knew what to say. Not them. Not the involuntary audience. Only Tony in the background with teary eyes. The box went back into my purse. Their papers stayed on the table. Margaret's smile faded. Emma put down her phone. And David? He just looked down. I took a deep breath. It was done. It didn't hurt. On the contrary, it freed me. I was no longer part of that game. I was the woman who walked out of the trap with her head held high. And no one could react. Everyone stares without reaction. I stood there, letter in hand, the pink envelope still on the table, and my voice as firm as ever. This divorce is not an end for me. It's a beginning. My former family's eyes were fixed on me, unreacting. I've been hired by the Grand Plaza Hotel. I start in 2 weeks. Housing included, a decent salary, respect. I took a deep breath, savoring every word. It was the first time I had said it out loud. Until then, it was just a secret kept in a folded paper. But now it was real. My announcement echoed through the walls of the restaurant that had seen me silently endure for so long. And in the midst of the silence, I heard the sound I had most awaited, the murmur of true surprise. There was no way to ignore it. The tables around turned to me. Customers whispered among themselves. Colleagues stopped working for a moment. That speech wasn't just about a job offer. It was about dignity, about showing that no one could bring me down. My whole body vibrated. I was standing whole and finally visible. Now what? Does the community react? It was Tony who started. A timid but sincere clap. Soon others followed. Maria, with shining eyes, clapped without disguise. Mr. Romano clapped proudly and gave a slight nod. The customers, some who had known me for years, also joined in, applauding not only my courage but my story. The shame Margaret tried to provoke turned against her. I saw the discomfort on her face. She fiddled with her purse strap, tense, unable to regain control of the situation. Emma lowered her cell phone, not knowing where to look. The applause wasn't loud, but it was powerful. It was a kind of justice that needed no speeches, just truth. I smiled, my eyes welling up. That was it. I was being validated. The woman they tried to diminish was now receiving a standing ovation. And not for having won, but for having resisted. Each clap was a reminder that I wasn't the problem. I was the solution they never imagined. And there, in the heart of Romano's, I recovered what they had taken most from me. Faith in myself. But what about David? What about David? He finally stood up, awkwardly, trying to appear present. Jennifer, I didn't know you. He started the sentence, but it was already too late. He was pale. He tried to find support in the faces of others, but it no longer existed. He extended his hand, as if wanting to offer something he had never given. But I didn't recoil. I just raised my palm and gently interrupted him. It's all right, David. You don't need to explain. You made your choices. And I made mine. I spoke with firmness, without resentment. Only with a clarity that came from the soul. He swallowed hard, not daring to look me in the eye. I sat down again just for a few seconds just to finish my dessert. The sweetest of my life. In that moment I was no longer a wife, nor a victim, nor a supporting character. I was the protagonist. And no one could take that away from me anymore. The woman who used to be silent in the face of offenses now responded with presence, with dignity. It was liberating. A liberation without shouting. Just with attitude. And when I stood up I was no longer the same. She leaves there a changed person. Emma caught up with me backstage at the restaurant, phone in hand and her wounded ego plastered across her face. This wasn't in the script, she muttered, almost in a forced laugh. For the first time her sarcasm sounded like a shield, not a weapon. She seemed more lost than mocking. The sister who helped orchestrate the humiliation now faced her own shame. She hadn't expected me to rise with such elegance. Perhaps you wrote the wrong script, I replied without raising my voice. She didn't retort. She just lowered her eyes and left. That phrase, small but precise, was my farewell to her. There was nothing more to say. Their plan had failed. And all that remained was the uncomfortable silence of defeat. Deep down I felt a trace of pity. Not for Emma, but for all those who spent their lives believing that diminishing others was a way to win. They had no idea what true strength was. I knew. I learned the hard way. And now I used that strength to leave whole. Will Margaret accept defeat? Does Margaret give up? Shortly after, I found Margaret in the restaurant corridor, talking to two frequent customers. She tried to smile, trying to reframe the narrative. It was all a misunderstanding. She exaggerated, poor thing. She was sensitive. Before the story gained traction, Mr. Romano approached. He stood in silence for a few seconds, just observing. Then firmly he said, "If anyone exaggerated here, it wasn't her." The air froze. Margaret turned pale. "This restaurant is proud of those who work here, Margaret. And Jennifer is one of the best." She tried to respond, but he raised his hand, asking for silence. Some people reveal themselves on difficult days. And today we saw who's who. His words were a wall between us. A wall that, this time, protected me. The customers looked at her strangely. The play was dismantled. There were no more applause for her. For the first time, Margaret was put in her rightful place. Not by me, but by someone with social authority, something she valued so much. And there I was sure that the turnaround was complete. Who was on my side? Does the community take sides? As I left, I walked slowly through the dining room. Each step was a silent farewell. Maria hugged me tightly, saying she would miss my calmness. Tony gave me a folded note. "Thank you for showing that we can come out on top." Even Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Chin, the loyal customers, came to kiss me on the cheek. "You shine, dear." My eyes filled with tears. Mr. Romano was waiting at the door. "This is your home if you ever want to come back," he said. I didn't promise anything. I just thanked him. Because now I had another destination. But I knew that place, which had so often seen me cry in the pantry, now saw me leave with dignity. It was the end of a cycle. I took one last look at the dining room, at the tables, at the faces that had been part of my story. I took a deep breath. I smiled. And I left. Without looking back. Because what awaited me ahead was much greater than everything that kept me there. I was starting over. The new journey begins. I stepped out of the taxi with 2 suitcases and a newfound courage in my chest. The building where my new apartment was located was simple, but beautiful light bricks, a small balcony, and a lobby that smelled of lavender. The receptionist handed me the keys with a welcoming smile. I climbed the stairs with a pounding heart. When I opened the door, I found myself in a home that was all mine. The apartment was functional. A 2-seater sofa, a small round table, and open-plan kitchen. There were fresh flowers on the sink and a welcome note signed by Jessica. I sat on the living room floor and closed my eyes for a few seconds. Silence. For the first time in a long time, that silence didn't mean loneliness, it meant peace. A clean slate. I took a long bath, unhurriedly, as if washing not only my body, but also the remnants of a difficult past. I threw away the pink envelope that I had still kept out of habit. I looked out the window and saw the sunset behind the buildings. There were no promises of perfection, but there was room to breathe. And that was all I needed. Now for the next step. Will the job be what she expects? On Monday, I put on the Grand Plaza uniform with a mix of pride and nervousness. The light fabric, the impeccable stitching. Everything was different. Jessica greeted me personally at the reception. She introduced me to the team, the departments, the cafeteria with a garden view. Everyone was kind, effortlessly. They called my name with respect. I was new there, but not invisible. In just a few days, I realized the routine was intense but organized. Each guest brought a universe, and I felt capable of welcoming them all. The training was challenging, but every lesson excited me. There was no room for doubt. There my talent made sense. Maria always said that the right place changes the way you walk. I was walking differently. In a short time, the managers began to entrust me with more complex tasks. I coordinated a group arrival, solved a reservation problem, and suggested adjustments that were accepted. I felt my name gaining weight. I was no longer the girl who waits tables. I was Jennifer Adams, a respected professional. But would I be able to sustain this pace? Will she be able to handle it? 3 months later, I was called to a meeting. Jessica awaited me with a smile of someone who already knew the answer. "We are promoting you to customer service supervisor." My heart almost jumped out of my mouth. I tried to maintain composure, but my voice choked as I thanked her. "You have poise, empathy, and natural leadership. That can't be taught," she said. Hearing that was like receiving a hug in the middle of my chest. I remembered the days at Romano's, the tears held back in the storeroom, Margaret's sharp words. None of that could define me anymore. Now I looked in the mirror and saw a woman who not only survived but flourished. The Jennifer who accepted crumbs had given way to someone who knew her own worth. And that was reflected in every gesture of mine. I organized my new routine, took on new responsibilities, and made sure to lift other women up, as they had done for me. That wasn't just work, it was a mission. It was a legacy. I was no longer afraid to take up space. In fact, I made sure to occupy it with firmness and kindness. Because now I knew who I was. The old Jennifer no longer exists. Sitting on the terrace bench on a warm autumn night, I looked out at the city that was now mine. I thought of everything I had experienced. The harsh words, the disdainful looks, the closed doors, the pink envelope. All of it seemed so distant. And at the same time, it was part of who I had become. Because deep down, even the pain pushed me forward. It was curious to think that, if it weren't for that humiliation, perhaps I would still be trapped in that small life. In that false idea of family. In that voice that told me I was not enough. Today, those voices no longer affect me. Not because they disappeared, but because I lost the habit of listening to them. I learned to listen to something else, my own intuition. The silence on the terrace didn't hurt. It was reflective. Wise. I wondered if it was all worth it. The answer came with the breeze. Yes. Every tear had a purpose. Every no paved the way for the big yes. And I wouldn't change anything, because it was precisely this journey that gave me what I have today. Including myself. Was it all worth it? I remembered with some humor the phrase Margaret always repeated. It's not enough to be good, you have to be seen. She used it as a criticism, as if to say my goodness was useless if no one noticed. Today, ironically, I am good and I am seen. Not because I shouted louder, but because I persisted. Because I insisted on being who I was, even when they said it wasn't enough. Margaret valued appearances. I learned to value essence. She wanted to be applauded. I just wanted to be respected. And the most beautiful thing was to realize that, by choosing my truth, recognition came naturally. I didn't need to conform. I just needed to flourish. I just needed to resist time and believe that my moment would come. Now, when I walk through the hotel corridors, I hear my name with pride. When I participate in meetings, my ideas are heard. And when I return home, I feel at peace. Because I know I owe nothing to anyone anymore, only to myself. And whoever sees me today sees me whole. Who sees Jennifer now? On my birthday, I bought a bottle of sparkling wine. Nothing expensive, nothing extravagant. I went up to the terrace with a simple glass and my favorite dress. Alone, no audience, no scripts. I toasted in silence. To myself. To what I left behind. To what I achieved. To what I continued to build. It wasn't about the luxury of the party, but about the meaning of the celebration. There between the sky and the buildings I closed my eyes and gave thanks. For not giving up. For believing even when everything seemed in ruins. And for having learned that self-respect is not begged for, it is earned. I was my own home now. My own shelter. And no one could ever take that away from me. The breeze gently touched my face as if to say, "You did it." I didn't need applause. I didn't need witnesses. Because deep down I was the only person who needed to see my own worth. And now I saw it. Self-respect won. Today when I come home after a busy day, I am still surprised by the welcoming silence of my walls. There are no veiled shouts, no heavy glances. Just me. And my story. I keep the letter from the Grand Plaza in a discreet frame in the hallway. Not as a trophy but as a reminder it wasn't luck. It was courage. Sometimes I pass by the old jewelry box and smile. It's still stored, now empty. It no longer needs to protect my plans. My life no longer fit in there. It grew. It overflowed. I am proud of the woman I was and even more proud of the woman I became. I was rejected, discredited, exposed. And even so I flourished. I don't hate Margaret. I feel sorry for her. Because she never understood that destroying someone from within doesn't make you bigger. It makes you empty. And I chose to be full of purpose, of worth, of affection. I didn't come back for revenge. I came back to show that a new beginning is the greatest answer. And whoever sees me smiling today might not even imagine that it all started with a pink envelope. Now, I'm curious about you who heard my story. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Have you experienced anything similar? Support the channel by subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing this video. I'm leaving another story on the final screen that you'll also like, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.